Hi there. Thank you. I'm Chris Sarandon, in case you didn't recognize me. And I'd like to welcome you to the podcast of Cooking by Heart, in which we talk to people about the vivid memories of the food they grew up with, and more importantly, the people and the stories behind those reminiscences. I'd like to welcome all the people who are listening to the podcast today, also the ones who are watching it. Well, they're not watching today, but they will be on YouTube. But I'd also like to welcome you guys to this sold-out house here at the SHU Community Theater in downtown Fairfield, Connecticut. Thank you. So today, my special guest, who you probably don't need to have introduced, but I'm going to do it anyway, is Jacques Pepin, the winner of 16 James Beard Awards and the author of more than 30 cookbooks. Jacques Pepin is a chef, educator, television personality, and artist who has starred in 12 acclaimed PBS cooking series. His dedication to culinary education led to the creation of the Jacques Pepin Foundation. We just spoke about it, and it's an extraordinary organization. Check it out online. And as the late Anthony Bourdain notes in his foreword to Jacques' memoir, The Apprentice, whenever anything significant happens in the most transformative decades of American dining, Jacques Pepin was at the center of it. Magnifique. Ladies and gentlemen, Jacques Pepin. Thank you. You're welcome. So good to have you.
Okay.
Thank you. Well-deserved applause, I must say, Monsieur Pepin.
Jacques, please.
You are too modest. We normally start my podcast by talking about provenance, where we're from.
Right.
And that's very important in your life, obviously. Can you talk a little bit about
where I'm from?
Your hometown?
I live in Connecticut. Here in Madison, Connecticut.
But where you're originally from. Okay.
Yeah, many years ago. Yeah, I came from a part of France near the Alps, not too far from Switzerland, called Bourg-en-Bresse, very well known for the chicken there, next to Lyon. And my mother, went into the business. Actually, in my family, I can count 12 restaurants in all of the area. 12 of them run by women. I was the first male to go into that business. It's true, but Lyon, the front that I come from, is pretty well known for those formidable women who had like 3-star restaurants, like La Mer Brasier and so forth. So it's pretty well known for that.
Also, the area is well known for chickens as well, isn't it?
Absolutely.
The breast chicken?
Beautiful, white plumage, blue feet, a red cock, bleu, blanc, rouge, the French flag color.
Like you're painting. Right. Can you talk a little bit about your mother and father growing up when you were a boy?
Well, I was growing up during the war, so when I was a kid. So my mother ended up having a little restaurant. She was a waitress and then eventually opened a little restaurant. So I started cooking, working with them and my 2 brothers when I was 5, 6 years old. By then, of course, my father had departed in the resistance. He disappeared and, for a few years. Interestingly enough, at the time, we didn't have the telephone. Of course, no television, no radio, no telephone, whatever. So we were in Bourg-en-Bresse next to the railroad station, big railroad station. And because of that, we were bombed the first time. And I was in the garden with my grandmother and my 2 brothers. We had a communal garden that we went to do salad and so forth.
You were how old?
At
this point?
About 5 and a half. And so no one was impaired or anything. But then my father didn't know. He came back. He has no way of telephoning, and then we are not there. Then he found out that some cousin. Then they repair the place, and we get bombed again a second time. and we were not there. And then when the German came, they blew out everything that we had bombed again. So three times it was destroyed. 3 times we were not there.
Yeah, for those of us who are went through the war, I was very young, obviously at the time, but we have never had an experience of there being a landed war here.
Yeah, that's true.
And it's extraordinary.
It is. When you stand, I remember in the street and seeing the German going down, walking down, that's, you feel invaded. I mean,
of course. Now, your father was in the army, yes, during the war?
Well, he was not in the army, he was in the resistance. I mean, he flew to the mountain to be in the resistance.
But that was after, right? He was in the army first?
In the army before.
Right. And during the time that your father was away, can you talk a little bit about how your mother provided for the family?
My mother was fantastic. I mean, this way she could. I remember the first time she took me, we were already going to school when I was 6 years old, but during the vacation in summer, then she took me to a farm, took my brother to another farm. At least we had something to eat there. So we went on her bicycle, so like 30, 40 miles, whatever, on the bicycle, and left me there. But she would do that all the time, go to different farms, try to get a few eggs here, one thing or another. She really cooked. I'm very miserly in the kitchen, and that's probably from my mother. She never wasted anything. Well, no one at the time, because, I mean, food was very precious. And,
this is very much the experience of people who grew up poor. Because you never wasted anything. Yeah, no, same with my family,
Yes, certainly, yes, that's very important. So I remember when I got married, and I was married 54 years, and I would cook something, and I go somewhere, like I had to work in New York, whatever, and I come back, and my wife got something else. She said, why didn't you finish that in the back? So we started arguing with this, because never threw anything out. So after a while, each time I came home, everything was cleansed. I don't know what she did with it.
Right. My mother used to do the same thing. Whenever my mother and my aunt would go any place to eat, they would always take the bread with them, because they said they'll throw it away.
Yeah, of course. Yes, and that's a good point. I mean, you were talking about Anthony Bourdain there, and he talked about that in one of his books, Kitchen Confidential, when he started, and I say he's absolutely right. The stupid law, which is that you have a basket of bread in a restaurant and you don't even eat it. And if the table next to you say, can I have some of your bread, you will give it to them. If you don't give them, that bread has got to go in the garbage.
Right.
Butter has to go in the garbage. That's ridiculous.
Of course.
It makes no sense at all. So.
Now, thank heavens there are now programs in which food that is not used is then recycled, right?
Much more than it used to be, yes, certainly, and that's a good thing. It's needed too, because most of the food, I mean, for me, when I buy food at the market, I look at the date, but even if it's 5, 6 days, 10 days later, usually it's still pretty good. I mean,
right.
I don't really worry too much about that.
Can you talk a little bit more about, during those war years, how your mother provided for you guys? You had, what, 2 brothers and you?
2 brothers, two brothers. And so, yes, I mean, a lot of root vegetable or stuff that we grew or that she could get into a farm. If she get eggs, she would, I don't know what she did exactly with eggs, with a mixture of salt and water to cure the eggs so they could stay like that for months. Everything was kept in one way or the other.
Right.
Like this, and bread and, that we use, we reuse. There is nothing which was not used in one way or the other. I mean,
what were your favorite foods when you were a little boy? Things that your mother was able to provide for you?
Well, for a special holiday, I mean, certainly there are those dishes that, when you're a child, those tastes are very visceral, like they stay with you, the rest of your life. And regardless of where you're born, the smell of the kitchen when you're a child and the taste of what your mother did or aunt, I could close my eye. I work in the greatest restaurant in the world. I ate in the greatest restaurant. But, you know, if I close my eyes and eat my mother chicken with cream sauce, I say, that's my mother chicken with cream sauce or stuff. Yesterday, I told you I was in New York with Lydia Bastiani. She wanted me, she's doing a new show, and I went. She said, do something from your mother. So I did the egg Jeannette. I called egg Jeannette. I named after my mother. She did hard-cooked eggs. She cooked and then cut it in half, take the yolk out and mash it up with a lot of garlic and parsley, a bit of milk, restuff the eggs, and saute the eggs stuffed side down in a skillet with a bit of olive oil to brown it, and with a bit of the stuffing left over and mustard, she does a mustard sauce to serve with it. So those are kind of visceral dishes,
yes,
which I remember as a child.
Now, so we don't shorten your father's contribution here.
Oh, no.
Talk a little bit about your father, because he was a lively character, yes?
I have a recipe that I do too for my father, which is called fromage fort, which means strong cheese. And he used to do that, which is pretty common in Lyon. When we had leftover cheese, the cheese are like 6 weeks, 3 weeks, 2 weeks old, some with mold on top too. You would take all of those cheese, scrape out the mold and all that, and soak it with usually some bouillon from the soup or some white wine, and put it into a jar and put it into the cellar. And it macerates there, and eventually crush it into a paste that we call fromage fort. I do that now, of course, in the food processor. It takes 2 minutes, leftover cheese, some garlic in it, white wine. You have 1.5 pounds of cheese, of a mixture of Swiss cheese, goat cheese, any type of cheese. You scrape the mold, put that in there, and you can fill it up in a little container and freeze it. Otherwise, you spread it out on toast, and it's great this way, or under the broiler too. Serve with a salad. All that. To serve a salad in a restaurant with this around, now you can charge $15 for it.
Now, I know kids are fond of sugar. How did sugar was in short supply during the war?
Yes, it was in short supply, except for fruit, because it's always fruit in the Rhone Valley. We had a fair amount of fruit, and my mother would do all kind of confiture and jam and so forth with that. That usually was the kind of sweet we have would come from sugar, from fruit. You know.
From fruit, sometimes beets as well?
Oh, beets, yes, beets. Actually, yes. With beets, she did a syrup. She cooked the thing, I don't know what she did, like almost like a brown Kero syrup, you know, that she did with me, and that's what we use as a sweetening agent.
When you didn't have sugar, right.
Yeah, she did that with beets, yeah.
And you talk also in The Apprentice, by the way, this book is an extraordinary book that Jacques wrote a number of years ago, but that is just fascinating reading. It's really wonderful, and it's available, by the way, today. How about Mou Vin Rouge?
Yes, that's another thing my mother used to do when we killed, a lamb or killed whatever animal, the lamb certainly. Then she used to keep the lung. I mean, everything was used, all the offal and so in one way or the other.
Right.
But at that time we had a little restaurant, and my father used to buy the wine in barrel. So when the wine was, my brother and I used to draw the wine, and we had a piece of stick with a piece of pipe attached to it, which was attached about that much away from the bottom, so that you didn't, draw the wine directly to the bottom because there was deposit and so forth. But when that was used, then the rest of the wine my mother would use to do a mou vin rouge, a red wine sauce with the lung of the animal and so forth, which was quite interesting too, because I remember showing that to a friend of mine many, many years ago here in Connecticut, and she said, "Oh no, I use the lung." So she had the lung and she cooked it, except she didn't do it as my mother would blow into the lung to reinflate the lung.
Right.
And saute it up. She didn't do that. So she put it into, and it started blowing up, to lead the pot.
Explode.
Like another movie.
You also mentioned in the book something called la crasse de beurre.
La crasse de beurre, yeah, right. When we cook, well, again, if my mother could get butter too, then she would cook it to preserve it longer. And as you cook it, the milk solid will cook, and you have that brown crust which comes on the outside too. They call that la crasse the beurre, the dirt of the butter, and that was a great treat on bread. It was very nutty and all that too, so the crème de beurre, yeah.
That was a treat.
It was a treat.
Yeah. I just want to go back to 1 second to your father, because you also tell a story about when your father, who was very spirited, yes?
Oh, yeah.
And he would, you describe him almost as a Zorba-like character.
Oh, yeah, exactly, yes.
And he did something with walnuts? He did something with nuts?
Oh, yes. Somehow, I don't know how he could do that. He blew walnut on the wall to break them, and they always exploded and break. And he never break anything. My brother and I tried a couple of times, broke a window, and I don't have to do it anymore. I don't know how he did it.
Your father could have been a pitcher, baseball pitcher. Yeah, exactly. So then, the routine was that in the summertime when you were out of school, your mother would take you to the country, yes?
Right.
To farms.
To a farm we did, and at some point it was the priest, I think the church there. I remember the time we went, the first time I went into the Alps, in the mountain, and it was done by the Red Cross actually, and the priest. And yeah, they put my brother in one farm and me in another farm a few miles away, the first time we were in the mountain. And we met once a week. There was one little church for both villages, but especially one oven for both villages. And like once a month, or once every 2 weeks, and the farmer would cook their bread. So they cook for like 48 hours.
A big oven?
Do their bread and bring it to that oven, which cooked for like 2 days. And there was not even any yeast at the time. When they finished cooking the bread, they take a piece of the dough, put it into a jar with water, and put it in the cellar. And it stayed there for a week and a half, 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. And then after they start with that mixture, water and flour, and the only flour, I mean, the yeast, the natural yeast in the flour will start bubbling,
right,
but then die pretty fast. So they do re-wetting, they call it. They put more flour and more water, and it does it again, and does it again 3-4 times until the dough was done. So it was a long process. And they did those big bread like this, which they put on the shelf in the farm, like plates against the wall, you know. And you hear that for like 2 weeks, and still the bread was great.
And what was it like around the table when you were at the farm? What was the routine?
Well, the routine, it was, well, in that particular farm, it was in the mountain of France, of the Alps. And at that time, we started the meal with cheese here, which I'd never done in my life.
No.
In France, we never, because they do cheese, they are kind of Swiss cheese. So we started like that, and usually a big soup after. But it was maybe in that farm that you mentioned, the table. Yeah, so we had in that old farm, the part of France that I come from, where we have those chicken, poulet de Bresse, are fed only with corn. So we eat corn in France, in my part of France. Many other part of France, they don't eat corn, but we do. And dry corn, they do cornmeal. And then we do a soup called les gaudes. Les gaudes, my mother used to do it, was simply water and salt, and that mixture.
Cornmeal?
Cooked in it for like an hour, slowly and so forth. And they would, in that farm particularly, it was very thick oak tree, the table like that, and there would be an indentation in the table about 2-3 inches deep, and that was the plate,
Wow.
So the soup, they would put that in there like at least 15-20 minutes before you eat, and the whole top would become a crust and kind of break the crust, and then you put cold milk on top of that.
Oh. Fresh milk from the cows, yes?
Yeah, sounds disgusting.
But you also one of your jobs was herding the cows, right?
Oh yes, at that time, sure, in the mountain, yes. We herd the cow, and yeah, that was fun,
Did you have to milk the cows as well?
Oh yes, of course. The first time I milked the cow, I think I mentioned it in that book. I was maybe that's when in another farm, my mother took me for the summer there and left me, and I was 6 years old, whatever. So I was pretty sad. But then the farmer took me by the hand, said, "Let's go to to see the cow. So we go to the barn, and here was the cow, which I'd never been that close. And she put my hand on the teats and showed me how to milk it. So I milked. First time that I milked a cow, and had a bowl of fresh milk, which was kind of foamy on top, lukewarm. So probably changed my life and made me a cook.
Now, when you were, how old did you go to school, to the lycée?
Well, I went to the lycée. I left when I was 12 and a half, 13. In France, we had to go to school until, to finish primary school until age 14. But I was in that class when I was 12 or 13. So I left at 13 and went into apprenticeship, yes. I mean,
but before,
I passed the exam and so
but before that, didn't you go away to school, to the lycée?
Well,
You and Roland?
once, yes. In Bourg-en-Bresse, it was, that was when my father had left first. My mother couldn't keep us, so we went to it was a priest, kind of Jesuit school, too, which was really, really tough.
What was the food like there?
Horrible. I mean, I remember we had one piece of bread a day, and we banged it on the table. It was hard, but some animal coming out of it too. I mean, we still ate it too. But I remember that there because I was starting exchanging things, and I was from town, so I didn't have much access to country. But a lot of the other students, they had parents who were in the country. Some had a jar of honey, some had a saucisson, a salami or stuff like that. So I would try to exchange one thing with the other. And I remember one time, I think I exchanged one thing with one honey on one side, and on the other side it was some type of salted lard, whatever. But I put it, I went to beg on one side of a piece of bread, they gave it to me, I turned it on the other side to go beg. And I got something which didn't really work out too well with it.
So you alternated treats.
Oh, yeah.
Sweet and sour.
Exactly.
Kind of.
So try to exchange. I exchanged that, I remember, for a knife that my brother had given me. So to get it was, I think it was his communion, his first communion or whatever. So the whole family came to Bourg, and I don't know what I did, but I screwed up in school, so I was stuck. The priest said, no, I cannot go into vacation. So they came to see me in the school to say hello, the whole family, but I couldn't get out. So, and that's what I gave the salami. I had exchanged a salami for my knife to give it to him for it.
Right.
So that was
right. Did you
still a bad memory.
Did you sneak did you sneak the salami at all while you were waiting for your brothers?
Yes, yes. And when I ate all of the outside. Yes.
So then, this is, I think, probably incomprehensible to a lot of Americans. But the fact that when you were 13, you knew that this was the life you wanted to live. Yes.
Well,
by the time you were that age, I know your brother was not interested in being.
Right. I mean, life was quite different than now. You have to realize we didn't have television, we didn't have the telephone, we didn't have radio or anything like this. So life was very simple in a sense. My father was a cabinet maker, my mother was a cook. So I was going to be a cabinet maker or a cook. Never thought that I could be, I don't know, a lawyer or a doctor.
Right.
That didn't really exist.
Right.
So.
And also she had a succession of restaurants, right? Once you left Brest.
Those little restaurant that she opened, repair and
right.
close and try to sell it. Yeah, she was very good at that.
And you worked in the restaurants when you weren't in school?
Well, my brother and I all work in the restaurant. I mean, I would never have gotten home and say, I'm bored. I would have said, well, what? Are you kidding? Your father take me to clean up the bottle or peel potato or do one thing. Oh, no, we try to escape.
Right. But there's one thing, the first restaurant that she had, the Hotel L'Amour.
Hotel L'Amour, yeah.
Right, was quite an extraordinary kind of community gathering place, wasn't it?
Yes, it was an interesting, that's the first time that we had the telephone there, because we got the telephone because we had the little inn, the little restaurant of the village. At that point we would receive message, and my brother and I would go up to the country to give those messages out of that telephone that we had. Yes, so we had chicken there also, and certainly, raising the chicken with peel a vegetable or going to get clover in the field, my brother and I to feed chicken. All that was part of our life, as well as that's probably where I killed the first chicken that I killed, which kind of traumatized me. But my brother, I think, was holding his head, so I cut his head off. Chicken left with his neck going all over the place.
Running around, I know. Yeah. There was
rabbit, chicken, too. Yeah, that's what our life. Yeah.
There was an abattoir behind my father's restaurant for chickens.
Oh, yeah.
And same thing. We would drive up to the back of the restaurant, and first the smell.
Oh, yeah.
I remember the smell very, very strongly, but also the fact that you would see literally chickens running around.
My mother would kill the chicken by cutting under the tongue, like that, holding it and letting the blood go into a little bowl with a tablespoon of vinegar, so that it doesn't coagulate, because she was going to use that in the sauce, and nothing was damaged at all. And then we pluck it. She cut it right under the neck and under the body, and then pull the neck out, and in the skin of the neck, then she stuffed it to do a sausage with, I forget what, and roast it to...
Use everything. Yeah, exactly. Now, you when you were, at that time in your lives, you and your brother also foraged a lot, didn't you?
Oh, yes. Mushrooming, mushrooming, wild leek, all kind of thing. Yeah, that was part of
you tell a great story about picking some grapes and cherries and peaches where you had to climb the tree.
Well, yeah, and the farmer came, and he shoot us with a gun. They had gun with salt in it. Instead of bullet, they put coarse salt in it. But when you get it in the leg, you have it.
You can feel it.
My brother was on top of the tree with a branch, and he broke the branch and the tree, and the farmer was at that time. Yes, we pick up a lot of dandelion, for example, and my mother cooked it too. But that usually do the salad with it. I still do pick it up in where I am in Madison in the spring. Yes, that's the rite of passage, to do the dandelion in the spring.
And you also had an adventure with your father once, yes? Picking mushrooms?
Oh, yeah, well, pick up mushroom in the wood, or the farmer would put a sign, watch out, not the cow, but the bull, fierce bull will attack you. But they put it all over to prevent people from coming to pick up mushroom in the woods, so we didn't really pay too much attention. But at that time, my father had a basket of mushroom, and the bull started going back and moving his leg and rushing. My father ran. I had thrown that basket of mushroom above the fence, and dive above the fence. That was.
All right. So then she moved on to a series of other restaurants, right? She had a second restaurant,
yes, right?
Where there was a lawn bowling.
Oh yes,
court there.
We did well. We play something similar to bocce ball called pétanque in French, and yes, my father had with the restaurant, 6 or 8 games where people came to play and drink wine and eat sandwich and stuff like this. So yes, my mother was very involved in this, and.
But weren't you and your brother also involved in preparing some of the food for the players?
Oh yeah, of course, yes. Oh yeah, my mother cooked. Yeah.
Sandwiches?
Sandwiches. I remember those old guys would play bull until like 2 o'clock in the morning. 4 people against 4. And in Lyon, we drink the pot de vin. A pot is 46 centiliter, just about half a liter.
Right.
And 6, so it's a pot of Beaujolais, particularly in the spring. So the pot of Beaujolais. So they drank so much of it that my father didn't even count them by the bottle. He counted them by the meter. He put that there. 1 meter of Beaujolais, 2 meters.
Wow.
They could drink.
Right. And then the family moved to Lyon, yes?
Yes, yeah.
And then there was a restaurant there. Then there was another restaurant, a succession, Le Pelican?
Yeah, Le Pelican with the second
right.
one, right.
And there's also a wonderful kind of picture of it, as you describe it in the book, of you're going to the market with your mother in the morning, where she would wake you up.
Yeah, because, you know, even at that time, she had a restaurant, she didn't have a refrigerator. It didn't exist. She had an ice box, so that she bought a block of ice, put it in a corner, and that's what she used for the chicken. She bought a couple of chicken a day, maybe a couple of steak too, and some fish. She always bought so that she would run out of it during the day, because at the end of the day, that was it. You know, no refrigeration. We ate what was left over. But the vegetable, you know, at that time, the word organic did not exist. Everything was local, from farmer, local too. And my mother would walk. It was the market along the Saône River in Lyon. So it's an open market. We started at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning until like 8, 10. So she would come around 7. I mean, my brother and I would come before going to school. We go with her to carry the
everything back for the restaurant.
Because we didn't have a car. It was about 6, 8 blocks from the restaurant. But she would walk the market, close to half a mile, maybe not quite a quarter of a mile, and then buy on her way back. Everyone knew her, and she would buy that case of mushroom because it was black, and she knew the guy cannot keep it until tomorrow, so she tried to get it for half price or the ripe tomato or stuff, and then get back to the restaurant, start peeling vegetables too, cooking for the day, and then the day after, again, everything was daily and so forth.
I know. One of the things that also struck me was, and you know, we talk about the difference in prices between then and now, and obviously it was a long time ago. But there was the family, your mother's restaurant, there was a prefix meal for how much?
Well, it was $1. When I came to America, it was 5 francs. 5 francs was $1.
Right.
And at that point, you had a first course, like an artichokes, or a salad of tomato, or a piece of melon, then a main course, vegetable always separated, the main course maybe a stew, too, or a piece of fish, too, vegetable separated, and a dessert, or a piece of cheese and a dessert, a carafe of wine, service, tip included, $1.
$1. My father had the same thing in our restaurant, where there was a prefix lunch with an appetizer, a meal, and a dessert for 75 cents.
Yeah.
Those were the days.
Right.
So then, here we are now, and you are in Lyon, and it's time to apprentice.
Right.
Who made that decision? Did you make the decision?
Yeah, I wanted to go into apprenticeship, and then my mother started asking, and Hôtel de l'Europe in Bourg-en-Bresse, where I was born, it's a very famous old hotel, beautiful hotel, and it happened that the chef there, she went to school with 30 years before, and so she contacted him, and they were doing apprentice, so I came there as an apprentice. It was a place where the kitchen was totally open. In the big hallway, when you came in of the hotel, you could see the kitchen open, all white, beautiful too, so it was very exciting for me. All kind of new things that I learned there, new machine or equipment or that.
And there was the stove was...
Yeah, the stove was a center stove. Yeah, you walk all around the stove. And of course, at that time, it was with wood and coal.
What did they call the stove?
The piano.
Ah.
Yeah, the piano, you work the piano. Yeah.
Right.
Like...
and your job when you first got there was what?
Well, to light up the stove and keep it...
keep it going.
Keep it going very often too. And then a lot of plucking, eviscerating chicken and skinning rabbit, scaling fish and boning out, you know, all that type of work. You work, the chef, I mean, the way of learning at the time was quite different. The chef would tell you, do this, and you would never have said why. You would have said, because I just told you. So that was, yeah. So you learn in a different way. You learn, you do, and at that age it's probably fine. And after a year, just a year that I was there, he called me you at the time, and all of a sudden he called me Jacques, and he said, tomorrow you start at the stove. I started at the stove. I'd never been close to the stove except to put coal in it. So I didn't know that I would, but through some type of osmosis, you know, you learn to, so I knew how to work at the stove, and I started working the stove, yes.
How did they, because I know one of the things that struck me about all of your writing is the fact that all through your career, particularly in France, that heat was extremely high all the time.
Oh, yes.
And that how was the heat regulated? How did you regulate the heat?
Well, that's a good point. The heat was already, you push a little bit of the coal on one side, a little bit on the other side. Like, for example, in the afternoon, you shut up the place from 2 to 5 usually. I mean, still in France, when I left France, we still work in two times. So work starting at 8:30 in the morning, work until 2. Start from 2 to 5:30, start at 5:30 to 10.
Right.
You know. So during the afternoon, we had 6 or 8 opening on that stove, a big stove. So you only keep one, and the other one you let it die, and you keep one so that at 5 o'clock you take a little bit of coal of this one to put in the other one to start the stove again.
Right.
So the whole working of the stove doesn't exist anymore. But it was a big deal because if you work the stove and it's 11:30, 12 o'clock in the morning, and you put too much coal at that point, people start sitting down at 12:30, and the stove is not lukewarm, but it's not very hot, and the chef will get crazy. So you got to calculate so that by the time people sit down, the stove was really full blast, and then you just add a little bit to keep it this way until like 2 o'clock when you start down.
So as much art as science.
Oh, yeah, I mean, the working of the stove was a big deal.
Yeah. And how did they know what the temperature was? What the proper temperature was for what they were cooking?
There was no temperature gauge.
No thermometers?
Just put your hand if it's...
Your hand?
No, so you have that big rectangular box, which is the stove. You have 3 ovens, usually 3 or 4, I forgot.
Yeah.
But anyway, you open the door here, the guy opened the door on the other side, it's the same tunnel, you know. And I'm cooking a souffle here, and the guy is cooking a piece of fish on the other side. The oven may be totally red on the side, maybe 500-600 degrees. So I put the food closer to the wall on the other side. I open the door. I put a spoon there on the door of the stove to keep it open. So you move the food like this, colder, hotter too.
Right.
There was not like, you put the thermostat.
Yes, right. You don't have this, or you don't have something to stick in the meat to check. Right.
Go take a nap, put it on 30 minutes. No, that.
Right.
No, you have to look at it all the time and adjust and put it back.
Right. So it was a dynamic situation all the time.
Closer into the food itself.
Yeah.
Yes.
And were the chefs, the people in charge, or the people the sous chefs, whomever, were they teaching you?
Well, teaching you, like they tell you, do this, do that. And you do it by repeating what they're
Watching.
doing. Yes, by watching most of the time. And I say more kind of osmosis, at least until you were at the stove and so forth. And after that, you start changing a little bit.
Right. And it's interesting, too, that when you arrived in short pants, right?
Yes, I was small. I mean, I'm not very tall now, but I was. So yes, I never had long pants. It was short pants. So my first long pant was the chef's pants. So that was very big.
And they were checked, yes?
Oh, they was checked, yes. Checker pant for the boy, yes, right.
It's a great visual picture. But no recipes, right?
No recipe, no.
Never. I mean, all through the reading that I've done, when you were training in any of the restaurants you worked in, there were no recipes.
No, no recipe. You work in a different way. You weren't by conforming at that time. You work in a place, that's how you do it there. You test, you adjust, you test, you adjust, you go until you know exactly how to do it. And then you do one dish after another. Yet, if I am somewhere and I do a chicken with mushroom cream sauce, if I do it 10 times tonight, 10 different orders during the night, if someone was behind me taking note exactly of what I'm doing, I'm not doing it one time exactly the same.
Right.
Yet it still comes exactly the same at the end. Why? Sometimes maybe the chicken is a bit thinner too, the pot is a bit hotter, it gets dry, you put 2 tablespoons of water, you do that, you taste, adjust, that type of work, So, yeah, that's how, and I remember, as I said, I can close my eye and eat my mother's chicken and cream sauce. Those are kind of visceral dishes, but I also would remember the lobster souffle at the Plaza Athénée in Paris, or the chicken pavilion I did at the pavilion when I came here. So you work in those restaurants and you learn how to do those dishes, and they stay in your...
Right, right. There's also a story you tell that's really quite lovely of being awakened one night at the restaurant. A waitress comes in and tells you,
Yeah, right.
you're the cook,
Yeah,
you're the chef.
Probably the second year after I was at the stove.
So you're what, 14, 15 years old?
About 14 and a half, 15 years. And so the chef has left by then, but some people came from Paris, I suppose, and so the waitress, Adele, I still remember, came and knocked at the door, and I was the oldest apprentice. Not the oldest, but I mean the oldest by practice, you know. So they say, you got to come down. It's 4 people for dinner. So I go down and I go at the stove. Fortunately, there was still some heat in the stove that I start. And I remember they started with pâté, so I say, great, just have to slice it, to arrange it, to find the... But after that, they had the chicken in tarragon, so which was a specialty, of course, there. So I did it and sauteed, and I remember, and finished it up too. And then she took it to the dining room, and I was behind the door. There was a little door with a round window. See, but those people somehow say, we like they said, can we say hello to the chef, which is unknown at that
14
time.
years old.
So
Wow.
I came in the dining room with the waitress, they look at me and say, whoa. That's the chef. I thought my first touch with celebrity cooking.
So, I got one of the questions that occurred to me as I was reading and just sort of thinking about this was, where did the confidence come from at such an early point in your life where you said, I know what my life's path is, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life?
I mean, the confidence in the kitchen itself comes from practice. You know, it becomes almost a DNA for you, you know, to know how to do a certain type of thing. You can do it close eye and so forth. It's a question of practice. As I said, 3 years of apprenticeship, you know, you don't start working at the stove for like a year and a half.
Right.
So you do a lot of repeat and repeat. And after that, I wanted to work in other places. At that time, I ended up in Paris, because Paris was still the greatest place, I mean, to be and so forth. So
it's the center.
I wanted to go and all the great restaurants in Paris, from Maxime, Fouquet's. I worked at the Plaza Athénée, Meurice, and so forth in the 50s. So I worked in Paris for like 7, 8 years.
And one of the things that it struck me throughout all this is that wherever you were, you always continued to learn.
Oh yeah.
Learning. You wanted to know more.
I'm 87 now, I'm still learning. So, yeah, if I work with anyone, you know, you always learn something. Sometimes you learn what not to do.
That's right. Right. So you're working in Paris, you're working in a succession of restaurants, very, very famous restaurants, and you're drafted.
Yeah, well, in Paris, I work at the Plaza Athénée mostly for like 6.5, 7 years too. But I work in probably close to 100 restaurants in Paris.
Whoa.
Because I work my day off. You know, my day off, I go to what's called La Société des Cuisiniers de Paris, Society of the Chef of Paris.
Right.
And you're a member, you come there, and you have your name. And there is an organization who I always thought should exist in New York. You need someone for the day, someone's income. So you have a job for a day, 2 days.
Which is a great idea, right.
So I work my day off for years, so I work in many, many restaurants. So you never knew I end up in the Galerie Lafayette, where I was serving 4,000 meals, which was just putting a plate with a piece of salad on top, another plate with a salad.
Right.
You know, that type of work. So you never know, you end up here or you end up in a 3-star restaurant.
Right.
So that type of working this way, you teach a lot, you know.
But you also frequented libraries as well, didn't you?
Oh, yeah.
You would go to the library.
At the Plaza Athénée, it was a great place for that. We had a small boat on the Seine River. We had a soccer team, and we had a big library for the employees. Yeah, that was very good. So
But not just books about cooking, also...
I think I still have one book last week, which was a classic old book that I stole there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we've all done that at some point. Yeah.
The human comedy.
Yes.
So,
Oh, yeah?
yeah.
Okay.
Comedy human.
All right, so then you're drafted into the Navy,
Right.
and how did you end up cooking in the Navy?
Because the Navy in France is very special like that. Usually it's only enlisted guy, except for the tech cook and people like that, professional.
Yeah.
But each of the different ships, you go on there, you'll go to the market, you have a budget with so much to spend per person. You go to the market, have to buy that, work with different people too, and they expect for the holiday to have lobster, to have this, to have fancy food. So you have to keep. So they want professional chef if they can find some. Mm-hmm. So when they had an organization with the Society of Chefs there, so the chef very often end up in the Navy. So at that time, it was I was drafted. It was the normal time, or 18 months. And I ended up staying 28 months because it was a war in Algeria. So at that time, so they were keeping you 3 more months. So I ended up doing my time, starting my training and so forth. And then after that, I was scheduled to go to Algeria, the war. But then my brother was there. And he was not enlisted like me. Mm-hmm. So they didn't send two drafted at the same time of the same family because they had problems where there were like 3 or 4 brothers. Right. So my brother was in Algeria, so I was sent back to Paris to the mess of the Admiral in Paris. So I started cooking there too, and eventually went to work for the president.
But then fortune changed.
Right. Yeah.
And you ended up cooking for whom?
Well, I work with 3 presidents in France. The first one was Félix Gaillard. Under the Fourth Republic, the government was changing at a relatively rapid pace. So I think his government was about 6 months, something like that. Then Henri Fimelin was the mayor of Bordeaux, who became the prime minister too, which lasted only a couple of months. There was kind of an upheaval in France with Algeria and so forth. And then came General de Gaulle. So I started with de Gaulle.
So you were Charles de Gaulle's cook.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And his wife?
Yeah, Tante Yvonne. They call it Aunt Yvonne.
Aunt Yvonne,
She called me Petit Jacques. And so I did the menu with her on Monday for the week. Except, I served people like Ivanhoe at the time, Nehru, Tito, Macmillan, the head of state.
So whenever they were visiting,
so
dignitaries.
At that time, dinner like this are set up by the protocol, so it depends. Like for Ivanhoe, for example, they already had invited the French president, so they say you cannot repeat that fish. They already had that fish there. The menu has to be long, the menu has to be short, the menu has to be 45 minutes. So, you work with the protocol to suggest a couple of menus and so forth. But except for that, then the other menu I did with Madame de Gaulle the rest of the week. Certainly on Sunday, they were very devout Catholics. So after church, there were the children, grandchildren, and all that. Every Sunday that we cook for like 8-10. And I have to say that for that special dinner on Sunday, de Gaulle, I had to give a special accounting. They would pay from their own pocket because they said that's our dinner. So, which was a drop of water in what we spent,
but still,
it was a question of principle with the general.
What was de Gaulle's favorite dish?
Well, he loves colin, which is a kind of a strap bass that poached. Leg of lamb, for example, stuff like that. Not too rare, de Gaulle says, no good for his blood. Mm-hmm. So, things like that. Apple tart, very classic.
Dishes. Down home food.
Yes.
And when you left, he gave you a gift.
Yes. Called me to his room with his wife, said, give me that big cigar, smoke a cigar to my health. He would say that now, right? Yeah.
So after the service, what was happening then?
I went back to the Plaza Athénée for a few months, and then I had a chef there that I met, an old pastry chef who had worked in Chicago, in America. I said, oh, you got to go to America. And I said, I want to go to America. America was, the jazz to it was the golden fleece still. And so most immigrants, of course, come to America to get a better life. I mean, better money or for economic reason, but often for religious reason, racial reason, or type of I didn't really have any of this, and I didn't intend to stay. I said, I'm going to go there for a year, maybe 2 years, learn the language, and come back. So that's over 60 years.
It's been a little while, yes. And you landed right away a job.
Oh, yes. There was a lot of jobs, and at the Pavillon was considered the greatest French restaurant in New York. And so the guy who sponsored me had a little restaurant called La Toque Blanche, the White Hat, on 50th and First Avenue. And but he didn't needed me at that point. So he took me to Pierre Freinet, at the Pavillon the day after, and you want to start tomorrow?
The famous chef, Pierre Freinet, yes. And you worked with him for some time there, yes?
I worked with him for 12 years, because after we worked for Howard Johnson together. So.
Right, and one of the things always that fascinates me too is that wherever you are, you adapt, and you don't make judgments about the food. There are things that, American foods, for instance, when you would go to visit Pierre Freine's home, and they were eating various things that were very American.
Oh, sure.
You didn't put up, your nose.
It was great, wasn't you? If you open your mind, you always learn something different and something new and great.
What were your favorite discoveries, American discoveries?
Lobster. Lobster in France exists. In the langoust, we call, which is the spiny lobster, as well as the lobster like we have here in Brittany and in Brittany or Normandy, but very, very expensive for a very special occasion. I don't think we ever had it at home. Here, boy, as sandwich with lobster in it. Just wow. So, from lobster to certainly discover stuff like clam. I didn't know clams, oyster.
Right. But also, it fascinated me that things that you discovered like Oreos.
Oh, Oreo cookie, that was great. I was with Pierre's wife. She had 2 little kids, and in breakfast, I stayed there. So in the morning, I said, what are you eating? So they had those Oreo cookie and those Rice Krispies into those little box that you made a hole in it, put milk in there. I said, that was great. So I love that. I still like it. I still like it. I made it not too long ago. I mixed chocolate, melted chocolate, mixed with the Rice Krispie, and do tablespoon of that. I do for my granddaughter and all that. I love that.
This is Jacques Pepin, by the way. Just remember that, okay? Now, something very important in your life happened after a time when you were working with Pierre Freinet, and a job offer came along to Pierre, right?
Oh, yeah.
From
the White House.
Right.
No, from Howard Johnson.
From Howard Johnson,
yeah. Yes, Mr. Johnson, Howard D. Johnson, was the one who created the company, was a regular at the Pavillon, and he decided to hire Pierre to try to revamp restaurant, do new things, create new ideas, and so forth. So Pierre, at that time, there was a problem with Soulet, who was the owner of the Pavillon, and so forth. So Pierre left and went to work for Howard Johnson. Right.
But at the same time, Joseph Kennedy used to eat at the Pavillon as well, right?
The whole Kennedy clan ate at the Pavillon, yes.
And so you had at one point, if I'm correct, 2 different job offers, one from Howard Johnson's and one from the Kennedys to go to the White House.
Yes, well.
And you chose?
Pierre wanted me to come with him at Howard Johnson, and then I was asked to go to the White House, yes. So I went to Howard Johnson. So. But you have to look at it in the context of the time.
Yeah.
As I said before, the cook was at the bottom of the social scale. Any good mother would have wanted her child to marry a lawyer, certainly not a cook. When I was with de Gaulle in France, as I say, I survived on the way on the Erucito. Never once would anyone have called you to the dining room for kudo. Are you kidding? That did not exist. The cook was in the kitchen in the back. That said, I never had an interview with television, barely existed, but an interview with a newspaper, magazine that did not exist, period. So there was that type of thing. So when I was asked to go to the White House, I had started doing a lot of things in New York. I was going to Colombia. I didn't really want to move again, but I did not really realize the potential because the cook. So finally, the one who went there was a friend of mine, René Verdon. He was a sous chef at the Essex House at the time, and I called him, and eventually he got the job at the White House. And maybe a year or two later, he sent me a picture of him with President Kennedy and so forth, or Mrs. Kennedy. So
rubbing it in.
That was totally new. It was the early 60s, women liberation, or getting. I think we're exploding in a different way because if you ask who was the chef at the White House before René Verdon, well, I was told it was a black lady from the South. No one would have known her name, no more than they knew my name or any other name. Mm-hmm. So the decision I took, you have to look at it in that context. It was not a very noble decision. It was just, I didn't thought that.
But also, it was an opportunity to expand your knowledge.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is something that you have done all of your life.
Yeah, I mean,
you went to Columbia
yes.
to learn English, and then went on to earn a degree at Columbia.
Sure, but I worked at Howard Johnson 1960, 1970, 10 years. I never wrote a recipe before, and there I was director of research, development, new recipe, working in restaurants and so forth. When I left Howard Johnson, I opened a restaurant on Fifth Avenue in New York called La Potagerie,
right.
Mass production of food. Then I opened the World Trade Center with Joe Baum. We served 30,000 people a day on the commissary that I set up. And I was a consultant at the Russian Tea Room. I'm saying all of that. I would never have been able to do any of those jobs
right.
without Howard Johnson. As a French chef, I didn't know that type of production,
right.
marketing, chemistry of food, American eating habit, and so forth. So, yeah, I learned a great deal at.
And also, you surprised a lot of your friends, didn't you? When with Howard Johnson's.
Of course, André Saltner, from Lutèce,
This is one of the great restaurants in the world, right?
Yeah, I made them at home, and I gave them. Say, "Well, that's a good stew." It was frozen from Howard Johnson. So yeah, my wife too.
And also interesting, and this is something that we need to keep in mind, is that during that time, there weren't that many, but the Howard Johnsons all over the country, there weren't restaurants like Howard Johnson's there were, but like Red Lobster or restaurants where the food quality is the same everywhere in the chain, and that was one of your jobs.
Yes, in 2000, Time magazine did an issue or two issues on the 100 most important people of the 20th century, and it started with Henry Ford,
right.
Finished with Bill Gates, I think. One of them was Ray Kroc in the middle, who created McDonald's. But I had met Ray Kroc several times with Mr. Johnson doing different functions. And as I wrote the article on him, doing some research, I realized that in 1964-5, Kentucky Fried Chicken, McDonald's, Burger King, the three of them were smaller than Howard Johnson. Howard Johnson was the people who served the most people in America after the American Army in terms of volume.
Wow.
So it was a big company. We had,
it was extraordinary.
And restaurant.
Exactly. Then, was it after Howard Johnson's that you met Craig Claiborne?
I met Craig Claiborne a few weeks after I was in America.
Oh, okay.
1960. It was, the food world was very, very small. Craig came to the pavilion to do a piece on the pavilion, and I met him, and he introduced me to Helen McCullough, who was the food editor of McCall, House Beautiful. She in turn introduced me to James Beard, as she spoke with him like 2 hours every day, and then to Julia. So 6 months after I was here, I knew...
You knew all these people?
The trinity of cooking.
Wow.
Craig Claiborne, Julia Charles, James Beard.
Right.
So the food world was very, very small.
Small then, yeah. For those of my listeners who are not familiar with who Craig Claiborne was, he was the food critic for the New York Times, right?
Yeah. Right.
And the most influential food critic in the country.
Maybe more influential than any other people.
Yeah, yeah. And you became close friends, and one of the meals that I was fascinated by was something that you guys called the greatest picnic of all time. Can you describe that?
We did at Craig also. You know, he did my wedding also. I mean, at my wedding at Craig, well, there was the chef of the White House, René Adon, Pierre Franet, Roger Fessaguet, and me. We were cooking in the kitchen like an hour.
Before the wedding?
Get married in an hour. So, yes, and we did a picnic on Gardiner's Island. You know, Mr. Gardiner, the 16th Lord of the Manor on the other side there.
This is Long Island?
Yes,
yeah.
The Gardiner's Island. So we brought all kind of food. We had over 100 people, and then we pick up driftwood on the thing and create a buffet. And we had Baccarat Cristal, Dom Pérignon Champagne, incredible.
Whoa.
I still remember because Craig he did that big piece in the New York Times, 1963, 4, whatever. And he wanted to have some flute, some Baccarat Cristal. So he went on 57th Street at Baccarat there and said, well, I have the chef of the White House, I have the former chef of de Gaulle, I have the chef of the... We're doing that dinner there. I need, 4,000 of Baccarat Cristal glass. Can you? He said, no, you have to buy them. We don't turn out. So she said, but we will give them back. We will reimburse you if you bring them back and touch. So he got all of those Baccarat Cristal glass. And I remember we carry back forth all kind of food from his house on the other side too. And I think we broke one glass. So all the rest of it he washed up and clean up and put them on this counter. And during the night, there was a big platter on the wall which broke and fell on those. Everything was killed.
Oh, boy. But back to the actual meal. You dug a hole in the ground, yes?
Yes, so we did a big picnic.
But it wasn't just lobsters, was it?
No, we had chicken, we had lobster, we had rack of lamb, we had all kind of things, but a kind of, what do you call them? With the
fire pit, yeah.
Yes, with the fun, with a clam bake type of thing.
Right, so. Which a lot of folks here are probably familiar with, yeah. Well, it sounded like it was, I wish I'd been there. So then you did La Potagerie, you got a BA degree from Columbia, and you also helped create, we were talking about this earlier because my son is a graduate of the French Culinary Institute, and Jacques is one of the founders. How did that come about?
Well, Dorothée Kahn, who created the French Culinary Institute, went to France with her father, created some kind of professional school, air conditioning, all kind. And she went to France with a group of people like this and went to Le Ferrandi in Paris, one of the biggest cooking schools, and said, well, we have to have something like that in America. So she came back and decided to create the French Culinary Institute. And at the beginning, she had some of the teachers from the Ferrandi coming to New York, and after that, she hired me in the late 80s, something like that. Then André Saltner was there too, Alain Seillac.
So the who's who, became associated with it. Sadly, as Jacques told me, the French Culinary Institute is closed because of the pandemic, ultimately. As you've gotten older, and it happens, yes, how has your approach to cooking changed?
Your metabolism changes, and when you're younger, I mean, you tend to work and add to the plate and add more and more and more. And then when you're older, you remove it plate to be left with something maybe more essential. And if it's summer and I have a beautiful tomato in my garden at the right temperature, a dash of salt on top, a bit of olive oil, I don't need much embellishment, anymore. So it's simpler. I cook a lot, for myself now. So I cook a lot of soup, stuff. Yes, simple.
And to you, I know you talk about, at times, the difference between home cooking and professional cooking.
Right.
Is it, because we're an audience, and I'm including myself, we're home cooks, almost all of us.
Me too.
It's true. All right, so I'll be more specific. What's the perfect way to cook a chicken? I grew up thinking that 350 degrees, you put the chicken in, you baste it, et cetera, but heat is more important, yes?
No, you can do it this way. You can do it faster. You can do it slower, but you have to baste it. I tend to put it on the side started because I also tend to do a little cut between the drumstick and the thigh because that's where it stays a little red, so I don't have to overcook the breast because of that. And basting it, but yeah, it's not only one way of cooking a chicken properly. You know, if you baste it, if you cook it at very high temperature. We had those arguments with Julia all the time. She cooked it this way.
Right.
And both were good. So.
Right. Getting to this extraordinary book, and you all saw the amazing paintings, and that's just a sample of the paintings that are in this book. When did the painting start?
Well, to do that book, I did not want to do a cookbook. I absolutely.
You just wanted to do a book
on art? I wanted to do a book of my drawing of a painting of chicken. And then, of course, when I started saying, it's okay, can we have a recipe with it? I said, no. So I said, okay, fine. I will tell you a story about eggs, story about chicken from West Africa to whatever. So that's basically what I did. So it's not, theoretically, it's not a cookbook. I started painting when I went to Columbia. See, I went to Columbia in 1959. I came here a few weeks after I was here. I was at Columbia, enrolled in English for foreign students. And I stayed here until 1973. I gave a doctoral dissertation, which they refused, so I left to an history of food. At that time, they said, are you crazy? Food? So it was another world. And I took one class in sculpture, I think, drawing at Columbia. And then at that point, coincidentally, in the early 60s, a whole bunch of friends of ours, we rented a house in Woodstock, upstate New York, so with a kind of a, artist community. So we started redoing all furniture and painting and so forth. And it started. But also, I was married 54 years, For 54 years, when people came to my house, we wrote the menu. I wrote the menu down on one page, and people say funny thing on the other page. Or I come at some time, we a great bottle of wine, we stick the label in it. Sometimes I wrote the music, was playing, and so forth. So I have 12 books that thick of half a century of memory with my mother, my two brothers, all of those people. And in fact, Claudine, my daughter, she's in her mid-50s, and she came a few weeks ago to the house. She said, what did I eat for my third birthday? I said, let's look. So
and you know.
We find wow. The third birthday, she drew chicken. So this is a whole life, memory. And I started illustrating those, and illustrating often with a lot of chicken. And
right.
So that kind of was the genesis, starting painting more.
Well, they are just extraordinary, and the book is amazing, and I thank you for it, as we all do. I have one last question that I ask everybody on my podcast. If there's one food experience that brings back the days in Brest with your mother, right. What's the one thing that is most evocative?
Probably her chicken with cream and tarragon, and my father, strong cheese. Yeah, that would bring me back. Those recipe or those tastes rather are very kind of visceral. I mean, for me, coming out of school, the greatest place for a child is in the kitchen. The smell, the noise of the instrument, the voice of your mother, father, and so forth. That stay with you the rest of your life, And when Claudine was a year and a half old, I hold her in my arm and I said, "Hey, mélange, stir it." So she stirred it. So she would eat it because she made it. I mean, she stirred it. And likewise with my granddaughter. When my grandmother was 4 or 5 years old, and she did many shows with me, but I put her next to me at the stove. I said, "Give me the salad." "Okay, you think it's clean? Well, let's get some parsley in the garden." So we go. I said, "Test it. That's not parsley, that's chive. That's tarragon. That's test it." Then I take her to the market. I say, "Get me some tomato. Are they ripe? Do you think they're ripe? Did you smell them? Those pears are not ripe." Yeah. She touched the food, come back. sit next to me, give me the food, and that, create a platform on a conversation, and then, of course, we share the food and continue. So for us, that has been the basic of discussion, or the basic of understanding is through food very often.
Yes, yeah. And it's one of the things that holds families together.
Right.
And as you described when you were in the Alps, when everybody gathered for the bread baking, that was part of the experience was not just the baking of the bread, but the community that occurred when everybody got together and there was celebration. And
you go any place in the world. I remember with my wife traveling in Yugoslavia by car and in small mountain there. So people look at you behind the curtain. For foreigners, you stop in the village there without even knowing the language. You order by hand. You have a bottle of wine, whatever food you have there. Within 15 minutes, you have people sitting around, start looking at you, then you send them a bottle of wine too.
Yep.
An hour later, you're talking in another language.
yes, right. The universal language.
You're normal. I mean, you're eating food, their food, you're normal too. So food, do bring people together.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I can't think of a place to which to end our conversation that's more apt than this one. Thank you, Jacques Pepin, for joining me for Cooking by Heart. Thank you so much.
You're going to sign this now?
Yes.